This podcast is brought to you by sarahraven.com, which is home to everything you need for a truly beautiful and productive garden. You'll also find great and essential gardening kit and stylish, lovely things to have in your house to bring the outside indoors, all inspired by the garden and the house being tied together. There's also plenty of garden inspiration, how-to videos and specialist growing guides. So head over to sarahraven.com today to discover even more. Welcome to Grow, Cook, Eat, Arrange, the podcast of me and very often Josie Lewis, the head gardener at Perch Hill. And she is indeed here with me today, and we're going to talk about the Q&A, so the questions that we get sent in by listeners of things that we are doing at this time of year. So Josie's going to kick off with a question that we've had about moving into a new place with a new garden and what one should do. So I'm going to hand straight over to Josie to answer that first question.
Okay, thank you. So the usual thing to say is leave the garden alone for a year when you've moved in somewhere and see what comes up. Check where you see sun and shade. You know, just get a real feel for the garden. But as this question says, the person wants to put their own stamp on it, you know, not wait a year. So probably what I would do is leave most of the bones in place so you can see what's coming up, but interplant with, depending on what time of year it is that you've moved in, interplant with annuals. So you'll have a show of something that you like that represents you in your first year. But you'll also see the perennials and the shrubs and what they do through the seasons. If it's autumn, you're moving in and you've got time to plant bulbs, and put some of your favourite bulbs in. Moving round to spring, you can get some of your favourite dahlias in and annuals, and so it'll be a bit of you and a bit of the old garden, and you can see them through the season what you want to keep and what to take out.
Okay, lovely. So my question was sent in by somebody who wants to do a sustainable Christmas as much as they possibly can. And what are the things that we would recommend that you can forage from your garden, a sort of normal average garden for Christmas decorating, but particularly for making your own door wreath? And my inspiration for all sustainable gardening and floristry things is Shane Connolly, who's the most fantastic florist who really campaigns about sustainable floristry. And he's taught me that you've got to start from the inside out, and literally everything, if possible, should be able to go onto the compost heap. So rather than using a wire bridged base, which is what I always used to use for a wreath, so those copper wreath bases that you can get at the garden centre or whatever, actually much better if possible to make your own. So go into the garden, what have you got that's whippy and pliable? So we quite often here use cornus, we use silver birch, we use wisteria actually, and it's a perfectly good time to prune these things. Hydrangea petalaris, the new growth of that, sometimes is quite whippy. There are any others that spring to mind, Josie, for you that is sort of really pliable and easy to make into a round?
I think you've named most of them, actually. No, I can't think of any others.
Okay, good. And then next rule is if possible, rather than using wire, use twine. Because, of course, twine can just go on the compost heap and it'll biodegrade, whereas wire won't. And so, if possible, then binding on the next layer of stuff. And for that, onto your circular base, I would use an evergreen. And let's have a think about the evergreens that lots of us have in our garden. Well, obviously, there's rosemary, if you've got enough of that. There's bay, if you've got a bay tree, that makes a lovely fragrant base. And then, of course, there's the evergreen magnolias, like Magnolia grandiflora, which some people have, particularly in London gardens. They're big, but a lot of people seem to have them. So anything evergreen, pittosporum, some of the more sort of evergreen, like some of the hebes, etc. So anything like that. And use that to cover your base, make them into little bunches, and then tie them all the way around your base with string. And then move on to the decoration. So we've got a lovely hellebore right now coming out called Maestro, and I'll tuck those in water vials. And so they can just get wedged into the base. I'm going to use rosemary and bay for mine, so it's really fragrant. and tuck those water vials in and fill them up with water and then add in your hellebores. But of course, what else? Hydrangeas. Hydrangeas, fantastic, particularly if you manage to dry them. Alliums, if you've managed to dry any. Honesty, lovely lunaria. And then the final thing from a really sustainable wreath, but forage from the garden, is, I'm afraid, one thing needs to be bought in, which is some lovely twinkly fairy lights. So that would be my forage wreath that could go on your door. So I hope that's helpful. And if you haven't got those exact things, then you might have other equivalents. So back to Josie.
Yes, my next question leads on from the previous one, actually. It's when you say part shade and full sun, what do you really mean by this? And, how long does full sun actually refer to? It's a really important thing when you're planting up a garden to understand where the sun and shade is. So if the plant requires full sun, then it needs more than 6 hours of direct sun. So that's really a south, or, I'm thinking about our garden here at Perch Hill. That's south facing in front of the farmhouse. So that would definitely get most of the day sun. And the west garden as well would. If a plant that you're adding into your garden requires light shade, this usually means there's a lot of sun, but it's filtered by trees. So that will give you that dappled, filtered shade. And part shade refers to 3 to 6 hours of direct sun. So you still need some direct sun for plants that like part shade. But, 3 hours you can get away with. And then anything that grows in full shade is less than 2 hours of direct sun. So that's really shady. That's like our north-facing Dutch yard, which right against the house doesn't really get any sun at all. And these are measured in midsummer, so this isn't winter that it's referring to. But, last year we had that sparmania, didn't we, in the trough on the north wall. And that did fine. I mean, I know it's a plant that likes shade anyway, but no sun at all. And the fuchsias did well there. Yeah, it's so I always say, just try things out. If something you love and it doesn't exactly fit into any of these so-called categories, then give it a go anyway. And most things can be moved if they're really miserable. So get your spade out.
Lovely. And so the final question for this month that we got sent in was one about coppicing. So coppicing is different to pollarding. So pollarding is what you see when you're driving through France and you get a beautiful dike or a ditch or a river and you've got a willow that's cut to about human height. And from there, you then get a great sort of nest and exuberance of growth. And that's a tree like a willow. You can literally do that. You can just cut the trunk and it'll just send out all these new shoots. And that's pollarding, and that's a lovely thing. But that's different to coppicing. Coppicing is where you actually take the trunk of the tree right down to the ground. And what then happens is that trunk, it sends out all these almost like suckers, almost they're like little new shoots. So rather than one big trunk that's quite mature, you get maybe 7 or 8 smaller size shoots. And it's actually a really good system, I think, for including quite a dominant tree in a smaller garden. And so we use it here with eucalyptus. So we coppice eucalyptus, we cut it right to the ground and it resprouts in the spring. We use it also with the most wonderful, really, really beautiful plant, which I'm crazy about, which is a willow called Salix Nancy Saunders. And again, by cutting that, you can pollard it, but by cutting that right to the ground or coppicing, it comes up and you just get this beautiful, beautiful new fresh growth in the spring. You can coppice hazel, you can coppice chestnut, but those are all for bigger gardens. But I think for a smaller garden, both any of those sort of more ornamental salixes and any of the eucalyptus are really excellent. And we then pick and pick and pick and pick from those shoots, because of course it makes something much more harvestable at ground level, but also it gives you more abundance. So it's almost equivalent, I think, like a cut and come again annual. In a way, by cutting it to the ground, you're producing lots of new shoots, so you create something that gives you a very bountiful harvest. So that's coppicing, and now coming up is the time to do it. So that's why somebody sent in a question. So anytime, once the sap is down, you can coppice, and then as the sap begins to rise in March and April, up will come these new shoots. So it's a really, really lovely, good thing to do. So those are our December questions, and I hope we've given you interesting answers. And thanks so much for listening, and we'll see you again next month. If you've enjoyed this episode of Grow, Cook, Eat, Arrange, I'd really love it if you reviewed, rated and subscribed on wherever you listen to your podcasts. It'll help new listeners to know that we're here and enable us to keep getting the very best and most interesting guests week after week.